These days, most work that was done with a pen and a pencil is now done on a keyboard. Typing up essays, filing taxes, and etc. Typing is fairly easy for most people. But have you wondered how people type in Chinese? So in this video, we'll explore how people type in Chinese. The most common way to type Chinese characters are using phonetic input methods. The pinyin input method is the most widely used Chinese input method. Users type Chinese characters by typing in the pinyin romanization of the character and searching for the correct character on the candidate list. For example, to type pinyin, you would type P-I-N, search for that character, and then type Y-I-N, and search for that character. Alternatively, you can just type pinyin as a whole. The computer is smart enough to recognize common patterns and words people use. For example, look at this. This is 我喜欢吃苹果. If you wanted to type out on the keyboard with pinyin, you would just type out 我, so W-O, 喜欢, so that's X-I, and also H-U-A-N, 吃苹果, that's C-H-I-P-I-N-G-G-U-O. You could also just type 我喜欢吃苹果 without pausing at all. The computer is smart enough to recognize this, and it'll show up on the candidate list, the whole phrase. Perhaps the biggest disadvantage of pinyin is that for less common words, you have to sort through the candidate list. And since Chinese has many homophones, the list can be very long. Another concern is character amnesia. Since you're basically sounding things out, you actually forget how to write the actual Chinese character. This is pretty common in East Asia. Let's take a look at another phonetic input method, 注音符号, also known as bopomofo. At first glance, you might think that it looks like Japanese kana, and you're not wrong. These symbols are based off of forms of ancient Chinese characters, and you use them to represent sounds. You type out these symbols out to make your word. For example, if you wanted to type 注音, you would type out these symbols. Additionally, unlike pinyin, you can type tones in 注音, which does narrow things down somewhat, but you still have to search through the suggestions list. There are a couple more phonetic input methods used for Chinese characters. The first one would be shuangbin, which is like pinyin, but it doubles up on each sound, and so what happens is as you type, you don't have to type as much for each character. There's romanji, which is basically kind of like pinyin for Japanese. You type in the romanization for the Japanese kana, and then you can convert that into kana, and then you can convert that into kanji via the candidate list. And there's kana, which is you directly type in kana and convert that into kanji via a candidate list. And there's hangul, where you type in hangul and you convert that into hanja via the candidate list. Phonetic input methods aren't the only way to type Chinese characters. For many older generations, particularly for non-Mandarin speakers, Wu Bihua, just known as Bihua, was what they used on their phones. Wu Bihua, aka the stroke count method, is a very intuitive input method that maps 5 buttons to 5 strokes. These are Heng, Shu, Pie, Dian, Zhe. Pretty straightforward, is it not? It follows stroke order, and you just have to type out the strokes. For example, to type out Wu, you need to type Heng, Shu, Zhe, Heng, in that order. The downside to this input method is that for characters with more strokes, it gets very long and messy to type it all out. For example, to type this character, you would have to type out a lot of strokes. It gets pretty confusing sometimes as well, since you have to remember the exact stroke order, and stroke order can vary by region. On the other hand, what do people use in Hong Kong and Macau besides Wu Bihua? I'm sure you know, but they don't speak Mandarin in Hong Kong and Macau. They speak Cantonese. So how do they type Chinese characters? Well, they use kanji, a Chinese input method widely used in Hong Kong and Macau. Kanji takes the normal keyboard, assigns everything from Q to X a certain Chinese character. But besides those Chinese characters, it also assigns them a bunch of shapes that are associated or similar enough to that character's sort of original shape. These are known as auxiliary shapes. Kanji works by doing this. It takes the Chinese character and decompiles it into graphical components. You then type these out on the keyboard to type the character. There are a couple rules that you have to know first. Characters are always decomposed in this order: left to right, top to bottom, outside to inside. When a character is one continuous structure, say, Mu, take 4 codes in total. What that means is you can only type 4 keys to make that character. For example, Mu, you don't have to type any extra characters. You just have to type one character here, and that's D, or Mu. To type this, you would first type Y, and then you would type W, and then you would type G, and then you would type V. What about for characters with 2 forms, as in characters we can split it down the middle and have 2 sides? For example, Ni. So for Ni, you first split it up into half. So left half is the Ren component, so that's O, and in the right half, you type N and F. For other characters that are more complicated than this, you would always type the first and last part of the first component, as in the leftmost component. Then you will type in the first, second, and last component of the second part of the character, as in the one on the right side. Let me show you an example. Fu, as in Fujian, the Fu in Fujian, you would type it this way. You would type out I, then you would type F, then you would type M, then you would type R, and then you would type W. Pretty easy, is it not? However, you can break the character into 3 parts, then you would type it this way. For the first part, the one on the left, you would type the first and the last code. Second part, or the middle part, you would type the first and last code. Then for the final part, the one on the far right, you would just type the final code, as in the last code of that one. So for example, xie, as in xie xie, you would type Y, R, H, H, and then I for the final component. Pretty easy, is it not? Here's another idea you want to keep in mind when you're typing kanji. You want to type the most complete form of a character. You want to make sure that everything's sort of like, it preserves the shape of the character. And you might skip a couple like important parts of the character, but you want to keep that in mind. Here's an example. Wan, so that's Chinese for 10,000. So what you did here, or what you're supposed to do here, you're supposed to type the final component as B, because it's the most complete. It completes the shape the best. There are a couple of Chinese characters which have really strange kanji codes that you just have to memorize. For example, men, as in door. For that character, you type A, and then you type N. Here's a list of a couple other ones that have strange kanji codes that you just have to know. These ones here are a bit unique, since they're really hard to decompose normally. What we have is we use the X key, which is a difficulty key, to represent that sort of vague shape. You just have to know these. Here are a couple of them. That's about all there is to kanji. There are some problems, such as with Han unification and other stuff, but generally, you don't have to worry too much about that. Kanji is more of a memorization process. Once you type it once, you'll probably just remember it anyway, because it's somewhat intuitive. Additionally, there's Sucheng, which is also known as simplified kanji. How Sucheng works is, it takes in the first and last code of the character. So for example, earlier we said Ni. Instead of typing O and F, we would just type OF. It's pretty simple, is it not? But the downside is, you have to go searching through the candidate list. The whole point of kanji was to eliminate that factor and stop wasting time. You could just type the character in quickly. Though some characters, you have to search through the candidate list because some of them have the exact same kanji code. There's one final input method that every Chinese person knows how to use, and it's the handwriting input method. Nowadays, on your phone screen or on your trackpad, you can handwrite a Chinese character. You can also just have one of those track pads, a separate pad, sort of a digital pen, and you can write your Chinese character on there. And this makes it really easy to write Chinese characters online. This is probably the easiest method. I know I said Pinyin was easier earlier, but it really depends on how you see it. Pinyin is easier because you just pronounce it, like you write how you say it. But for handwriting method, you write it how you would actually write the Chinese character. And you can write it in cursive or semi-cursive, and usually the computer is smart enough to recognize it. There's still a bunch of other Chinese input methods, but these ones aren't as widely used anymore. For example, Yutping, which is a Cantonese input method. It's basically pinyin for Cantonese. I don't think anyone really uses it that much, since it's not really widely supported by any government. It's not taught in schools as well. There's Dayi, there's array input method, there's four corner method, there's Wubi method, there's Zhengma method, there's Biaoxingma method, there's the ZYQ method, there's the Gaofeng method, and there's still probably a lot of other methods that I don't know. Thanks for watching.